All right, y'all, we back Thursday night. Let's talk justice, lost art of civics. Still getting into protection against search and seizure. All right, so we're looking at what about your papers? Well, about your papers, right? And world peace. We're gonna get off into that as well. Let's see. Sending out some invites. See if we can get a couple of people in here. We're gonna look at this situation with law enforcement, or the feds, let me say that, in our communities, and the fact that there's no protection. We got to talk about that, because there are some things I think could be done, should be done, but we're going to talk about it. Really look at what can we do. Oh, let me see if I can set this thing up to man, what is going on? Anyway. All right. Y'all hanging there with me while I'm getting things set up here, as well. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming in. We just getting started. We are, we're going to talk about the papers that you need when the feds roll up on you. And also we want to talk about this world peace, trying to understand, with the POTUS, how is it he's offering world peace and America as we know it is on the brink, of a total collapse. So we're going to deal with these things and also provide, some real substance, to these issues. Thank you all for joining the live. Thank you for the like. Thank you for the hearts, right? Come on in. I, really look to explain about these papers, because folks are out here really concerned. What papers do you provide the feds when they roll up on you? Do you know? Well, I know. And I want to make sure, I can explain that to you, not from the standpoint of what I think and what I feel. I want to show you what is, within case law, when you're talking about the papers that you're going to need, because right now the concern is when the feds run up on you, do you have your papers? And that's confusing for a lot of people. So we need to be able to identify what these papers are, and also looking at, the scope of this concept of peace that they're supposedly, offering, what that looks like. So just get ready to get this thing, set up here. See if CCC. Let's see. Give viewers to. No, not that. All right. Yeah. Trying to get the screen set up, y'all. Just hang in there with me, for a second. Getting ready to get this thing, get it started like we need to, making sure we have everything we need. I'm working on it. Okay. All right. So, looking at the point of the papers, I want to read this, for you, first. What papers do you need when the feds roll up on you. I'll give you that first. All right, thank you all for coming into the live. Let's see if I can get that for you. What papers do you need? That's a real concern. That's a real question. All right, so let's look at this. When we talk about the papers, let's go to Colander versus Lawson. So this way we can understand exactly what are we being asked to do, because when they say your papers, you all have heard them say they're going around and they're asking people for their papers, but don't nobody know what the hell they're talking about. No one can, articulate it. So I just want to show you what's written based on what papers you need to have. So here, 1983 is the relevant Supreme Court case regarding the requirement of credible or reliable identification. So this is where the problem comes into play for, the feds, because they're positioning themselves to be the authority over what's considered credible and or reliable identification. And I'm just going to tell you right now, what I'm about to read, the courts have already decided that it's unconstitutionally vague, because nobody can tell you what is credible and or reliable. This is why they have an issue with the concept of papers. And they let that mess with your head and or your mind by not telling you, what it is. One, because they can't. But it makes you feel like you're responsible, to do something. But if you understood that what they were doing was unconstitutionally vague, then you would have something to stand on. I'm going to read this again. But when it comes to papers, they have already decided in the courts that it's unconstitutionally vague to say what's credible or reliable. So what papers are they talking, about? Now, here's the kicker. Here's the kicker, you all. When it comes down to identification, when we're talking about law enforcement, when they pull up on an individual in the streets, right? Identification is a name disclosure, and I'm going to show you that. These are things that we're not understanding, and out of fear, when they pop up in our communities, thank you all for coming, into, the live. When they pop up into our communities, we're just riddled with fear because we don't know, what to do. Thank you all for coming, into the live, right? But anytime you are being detained, it's understood during that investigative stop, within the scope of the investigative sphere, the only obligation is for an individual to disclose their name as a form of identification. I know a number of you didn't know this, but I'm going to show it to you, right? I'm going to read it to you in writing so that you can understand. So let's get back to this credible or reliable identification, because when they pull up, they're now saying, do you have your papers? Or they have people thinking they have to show some papers. So again, Supreme Court case regarding the requirement of credible or reliable identification. Okay. The ruling found that the statute requiring people to provide credible or reliable identification when asked by law enforcement was unconstitutionally vague. You all, this has already been ruled on. So what games are the feds playing out here in the street? The game that they're playing is that you don't know. The people don't know. So they're taking a calculated risk. They're trampling the rights of the people. And this is a problem. Ooh, this is a big problem. See, you all right now are protesting the feds. If it were me in that instance, I wouldn't protest the feds. Protest your governor. Protest your mayor. Protest the sheriff. Protest the city police. Protest your senators. Protest your representatives. Because none of them at this point and or time are providing you with any protection against these atrocities. So divert your attention from the feds for a minute and make those within your state stand up and do a job and protect you. You voted for these people, right? And that's the other thing. You're thinking a concept, of the vote is going to fix this within the next midterm or something along those lines. Listen here. If these folks are not in a position right now to fix it, they won't be able to fix it then. If you want to put pressure on somebody, put some pressure on the people within your state. Make them do their job or get off the pot. Who's going to protect the people? Right? So let's get back to this identification, because they've played this game based on individuals talking about what identification you need to provide. So I just read for you a court case that expressed anyone that's asking for credible or reliable identification, that's unconstitutionally vague. No one has the authority to tell you that when you give a name disclosure, that's not identification. I want you to hear this. I'm gonna go to Justice C.J. Young. I want you to see what he said. Okay, let's see. Justice C.J. Young. Let me find what he had to say. Hold on. Oh, here it is. Because I'm explaining to you that they can't tell you need to produce this document or that document, or they won't accept this document or that document, because they don't have the authority based on what the courts have already decided to say what's credible and or reliable identification. The courts have already said that it's unconstitutionally vague. And I'm telling you that a name disclosure is valid identification or acceptable identification during an investigative stop or when you are being detained. When the feds pull up on you, they're still functioning from what they call the investigative sphere or doing an investigative stop. So let's look at some of the tenets centered around what can be done, because you have to remember these individuals can psych you out. They can lie to you. They don't have to be honest. They're not there, to tell you what your rights are. These are things that you must know, and then you have to be able to stand, on your right. But let me read this right here, because I'm telling you that a name disclosure, is identification when they're asking for your papers, because they can't say what's credible and or reliable. The courts have already said it's unconstitutionally vague. So look at what Justice C.J. Young is saying right here. He says, as we understand it, the statute does not require a suspect to give an officer a driver's license or any other document. See, this ties into the fact that no one has the right to say what's credible and or reliable, and how the courts have already said it's unconstitutionally vague. So you don't have to provide law enforcement with driver's license or any other document. Here he says, provided that the suspect either states his name. This is what I was telling you. It's understood whenever you're being detained, you're within your right to state your name as identification, and it's lawful. They may threaten you or make you, or interrogate you even more. But if you know the truth based on what your responsibility is, you have to understand how to stand on that. Okay? Because what the courts will do is, should it have to go before the court, and you're not standing on the principles of what's being said, and you fold in the fear of what they're doing, the courts say, we have to deal with what's in front of us. You should have stood your ground based on what your right is. Then the agency can be charged for a constitutional violation. And these are the calculated risks that they're taking, that people are not going to stand their ground. People are not going, when I say stand their ground, I mean understanding what their right is, like exercising the Fourth Amendment right to be protected against the unreasonable search and seizure. The issue is you all are yapping that you know you're right, but you do not understand how to exercise this right. And by the grace of God, I'm here to help you understand how to do that, because right now the people need protection. And the people have been abandoned. Abandoned. No representation. Nobody is like really out here making certain that these things can't happen, because what's happening is unlawful. We all see it. We all know it. But let's get back to what's written, because I've shown you where in the case that they've expressed these officers cannot say what's credible or reliable identification. So here we see Justice C.J. Young says, when confronted by an officer doing the investigative stop, you don't have to give him the driver's license or any other document. He says, provided that the suspect either states his name or communicates it to the officer by other means. See, you have the option to decide how you want to identify yourself. And the fact that you give a name disclosure, that's sufficient for identification. You are really, we have to come to understand how this spear, the investigative spear, we have to understand how it works. Because this is the issue as to why our rights are being trampled upon. They don't care. They don't care, right? See, you can practically give them anything, for that matter. But no one knows what they're asking for when they say, give us your papers. Okay? All right, so protection. It's unfortunate that the people are left with no protection. The governor can't protect you. And that's sad, because the governor is the equivalent to, a president. He's like the head over the state. This is what I'm saying. If there are protests going on right now, protest the governor. Protest the mayor, who's the head over the city. Protest the sheriff. Protest your police department, because no one's protecting you. No one's giving any voice to, the trampling of the rights that are happening, in the city. Make these people stand up and do what they need to do in the sense of protecting the people. Make them do it. While you got folks out here, trying to trick, average individuals into getting into confrontation, with these individuals and possibly going arm for arm. That's ridiculous. Make the officials do it. It's sad. These guys, the feds, they come into the cities, they have masks on, first of all, right? Then they abuse people, right? Physical, bodily harm. They take them from one location to another location. If that's anybody else, that's, that's a federal crime within itself called, kidnapping. Then they'll drop you off somewhere if they realize they made a mistake. But you have no idea who you encountered. This is insane. Your accusers, right? I'm sorry, not your accusers, but those who have abused you, you have no way of reporting back to the governor, to the mayor, to the sheriff, to your city police who violated you. All you can say is the feds. Y'all know that don't make no sense. That makes no sense. And then you have a man talking about a board of peace, wanting to bring world peace when there's chaos right here at home. These are all lies. These are games that's being played. But more specifically, what can we do? So I want to take you, to something for you to understand. There is a remedy, but people have to change their mindset with respect to how they deal with these forces. Because as long as you deal with them in fear and all you're saying is, I'm a citizen, or, I know my rights, I know my rights, that's not going to help. We really do have to be more tactical and more strategic, centered around the way they approach. Because all of this is situated to get to the courts. One way or the other, it's going to get to the court. Don't know if it's going to be you or me or this person or that person, but in one instance or another, this is going to make its way into the court. And that's the only way it's going to stop. If you're waiting for them to say, you know what, we've been making, a broad mistake, they're not going to do it. See, they know that they're violating your right, but they don't care. Because right now, no one's intervening to stop them. So they are abusing their power, but the way they're doing it is saying, we're presuming that what we're doing is lawful and it's, consistent, with state law and, with federal code until the judge tell us otherwise. That's the game they're playing. So it only makes sense that people now come to understand this thing called being detained. Being detained is associated with something called the investigative sphere. That's the foundation for what it means to be detained. And then that coincides with the investigative stop. So there's certain things about this that people have to understand. So when we do have an opportunity, because you don't know based on the lottery who's going to get hit. But understanding, these parameters centered around what they're supposed to do and what you can do to protect yourself, this is going to be key because they're not going to tell you. And the least you know, the better it is for them, even though they are trampling your rights. If you're not effectively understanding how to protect your right, that makes it easier and or better for them when it does go to court. So people now need to understand, centered around, this threat, being the feds, being, a part of an agency and or within government that most of you voted for. Ooh, how ridiculous is that? You voted for this. Oh, some of you may say, no, you didn't, but oh, yes, you did. Not understanding the casting of your ballot, good, bad, or indifferent. This is what you voted for. Now that it's here, what can you do about it? What can be done? Thank you all for coming, into the live. Make sure you share the live, because I'm telling you, your family and your friends need to understand the dynamic of the investigative sphere, or how to deal with the feds when they come in saying, show me your papers. Because nothing you do is going to be sufficient for them anyway. They're going to do what they're going to do. So you need to understand how to be proficient in protecting your Fourth Amendment rights. So if you get the opportunity to go into the court, you'll have a valid way of shutting them down. Here, this is what I'm talking about. This comes from the Justice Department right here. Understand what I'm saying. There is a way to do it, and it's centered around constitutional violations. No different than we just read. They don't have the right to tell you what's credible and or reliable identification, because the courts have already said that it's unconstitutionally vague. So when they do press a person in that manner, and you saw what Justice C.J. Young said, you don't have to give them a driver's license or any other document as long as you state your name. He said, or communicate it, by another means. That's up to you to decide. But they can't force you to give them this or to give them that. When they show up and they're like, you're being detained, you can even ask the question, is this an investigative, stop? And they'll say yes. And then you understand from that point, then your obligation would be to provide a name disclosure as identification. And they have to accept it. If they try to compel you to go beyond that point, they're out of line. But they don't care about being out of line, because they're in the catch me if you can mode. Right? So we have to be prepared, even still, to protect our rights, because no matter what you do, they're still going to do what they do. So exercise your right. So if you have the opportunity, if you're the lucky one that gets to take your situation in front of the court, you'll have something viable to make a difference. Look at this. So the parameters within what they're doing, it's called constitutional policing. Going to this from the Justice Department, right? It says constitutional policing, even as it's pertaining to the feds. They say it's necessary but not sufficient. The reason being, most of you have never heard about it, but it is written. It's on the book. That's the underlying factor to what they're doing from the state side to the federal side. That's how they identified on the books. It says it's a baseline standard. Okay? So that validates what I just said to you. They're functioning within something called constitutional policing. That's for the feds and for the locals. It's a baseline standard. Now, if law enforcement engages in unconstitutional policing, law enforcement, it can be taken to court and forced to change its policies or practices. That's the key. Did you hear it? If you want to force them, not beg and be like, what can we do? We need policies. No, we have to be strategic. And we have to continue to mount up the constitutional issues or unconstitutional issues. We have to keep showing where they're violating and or trampling the rights of the people. Then they can be taken to court and forced, Forced, forced. That's the position we want to be in. You all should be tired of asking and begging when the Justice Department is giving us the signature to what needs to be done, how it can be done. Unconstitutional policing. What's unconstitutional policing? You have to understand the investigative sphere. I know a number of you are not interested, in this. You got so many other things that you need to be doing, can be doing, and this doesn't, affect you outright, right now. You are, but this thing is cascading. And it's unfortunate most people just want to be reactionary. But listen, Linda, listen. Your family, your friends need to understand Fourth Amendment advocacy. You all, this is the time we should focus our attention on the Fourth Amendment. The right to be protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's the whole point of the Justice Initiative that I created back in 2015. To give people this understanding. Lo and behold, this is the education people need more than anything else right now. How to be protected, because your officials aren't here to protect you. Folks are out on the street getting hit with pepper spray in the face and chemical gas, and it's ridiculous what's happening. And there's no end in sight. And this is why I'm saying there has to be a change in tactic, because right now protesting is in vain. The protest needs to be centered around setting it up to where we're able to catch them openly in unconstitutional policing violations. The only way you can do that is understanding the manner in which they come. They come in the manner of the investigative sphere. Investigative stops. Detaining. That's the sphere. No different than your local police department. So there are these standard rules and things that have to be done in order to maintain the parameters of the stop. Otherwise, it's a violation. And these are the things people need to understand, the parameters of the stop. And I've shared one of the key points of the stop. The fact that they do not have the authority to classify what is credible or reliable identification. We read that one based on, case law. They said that's unconstitutionally vague. We see here where the Justice Department itself is saying, if you want to stop them, you have to catch them engaging in unconstitutional policing. You have to catch them. So people need to understand how to be strategic with this. One is being able to have them on record. Right? If you understand when they approach you, this is in the investigative sphere, and they say, you're being detained, and, they're saying, show me your papers or identify yourself, or, that you're then able to say, my name is John Black. Then you have to understand you have a Fifth Amendment right from that point not to answer any other questions. Are you this? Are you that? That question is incriminating. Were you this? Were you? That question is incriminating. See, the investigative sphere have one main tenet. Any officer, any enforcement officer Whenever they show up and they say they're doing an investigation or you're being detained, your obligation, and I'm going to show you within the court, case law. I'm not making this stuff up. But this is all about understanding how to effectively work the Fourth Amendment to your benefit so that you can exercise it and get the guaranteed benefit from it, because they're not going to give it to you and they're not going to explain to you, how the Fourth Amendment is supposed to work, on your behalf. Unfortunately, we as people have not had this education. But if you want the education, I promise you I'm here, to spend the time to provide this education. I created this initiative back in 2015. Lo and behold, people need Fourth Amendment advocacy now more than ever. So when they approach and they say it's an investigation or you're being detained, your obligation is a name disclosure as identification. That's your only responsibility. They may say no. Give me this or show me that. You need to understand how to stand on the law and make them violate the law, which would then make them violate your Fourth Amendment right. Once you provide a name disclosure, now you have to look at the fact that you can't be compelled at that point to provide private details. No different than if you're dealing with law enforcement officers, right? We're talking about your Fourth Amendment right here. Let's understand these things are real. So when they do say at that point, after you've said, well, let's go back, they're asking you to identify yourself and they're waiting for you to go in your pocket and pull out a driver's license or some other form of ID. And you just say, I'm Tim Watson. And they say, nope. You got to do, more, than that, for me. Are you this? Are you that? And you say that question is incriminating. See, you then have handled your responsibility within maintaining the obligation to the investigative stop. If they compel these answers out of you, at that point, they're violating, now. Right? There's something called a non-threatening character within the investigative stop, not dealing with the officer's demeanor. It just says when they approach based on someone being detained, the principles of the stop say you're only obligated to disclose your name. That's what it says. Now, let's look at it. Let me go to it because I know you all really want to see what I'm talking about as far as the statutory obligation. Okay. All right, so here, a state law requiring a suspect to disclose his name in the course of a valid investigative stop is consistent with Fourth Amendment prohibitions against unreasonable search and seizure. I'll read that to you again because what they're saying is from the Fed side to the state side, during an investigative stop, when they say, show me some ID, the suspect is only obligated The suspect is only obligated to disclose his name. Now, you've never heard it like this before because you don't read case law. And they will never teach it to you that way because they want to keep you, in the fold of doing what they want you to do outside of you understanding how to properly exercise your Fourth Amendment right and be able to stand on it. So if you have to take them to court, you can take them to court, not on a civil right infraction, but on a constitutional issue, showing that they violated and or trampled your right. So here, again, it says, a state law requiring a suspect to disclose his name. Now, when have they ever just came up and said, we need you to disclose your name? They don't come up like that. When they come up, they say, show me some ID, right? That's synonymous with disclose your name. You've just never heard it that way. But this is the way the law is written. This is what they are held to. For example, law enforcement have one right, and that's to investigate. Outside of that, they'd have a judicial warrant. That's called the custodial stop. It would have your name on it and everything else that they're looking for. Thank you all for coming, into the live. Outside of that, they are functioning within something called the investigative sphere. If you want to know more about the investigative sphere, I'm here to show you the ins and outs of it, the limitation to it. That's what has protected me for over 20 years. Not being threatened by citations and anything law enforcement, does to where the solicitor hands me a notice saying no accusation will be filed. I don't have to go to court. It's because I understand the limits to the investigative sphere and I use it to my benefit, right? And to their disadvantage. Most people don't understand this about law enforcement or as it pertains to their Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. It does work, you all. It does work. Let's look at it again. A state law requiring a suspect to disclose his name, right? So again, whenever they say you're being detained, you don't have to have a driver's license or another ID. And I'll go back and show you. I'm not making this up. Justice C.J. Young said it. I just read it. But they're saying the state law, or when dealing with the feds, you being the suspect, you're required to disclose your name. That's identification. They say that's consistent with the investigative stop because they're not asking you to do anything else. After you do that, now you can go to the Fifth Amendment. That question is incriminating. That question is incriminating. Protect yourself. And then if they're violating you for exercising your right, then let it be on record. We have to understand these things. Here, let me give you another one. All right, it says, further, the statutory obligation, talking about when you're detained within the investigative sphere, there's a statutory obligation. When the feds roll up on you, you're expected to do something. We just read where it said the requirement is to disclose your name. That's the form of ID that you can present. Now I'm gonna go back and read what Justice C.J. Young said because I know y'all don't believe, me. But Justice C.J. Young said you don't have to give driver's license or any other document so long as you state your name. So let's continue to see how more cases are explaining the same thing based on this investigative stop, based on someone being detained, looking at the investigative sphere. Because this whole thing about your papers, that's a mind game. That's a mind game. We read the case law that said they can't say what's credible and or reliable identification that's unconstitutionally vague. So here, further, the statutory obligation does not go beyond answering an officer's request to disclose a name. Once again, listen at how the law states it but look at how you're being confronted out on the street. The law says the obligation does not go beyond answering an officer's request to disclose a name. When has an officer out on the street came up to you and said, I'm requesting you to disclose your name? They don't talk like that. But when they say, show me some ID, if you associate it with what the law is saying, identification is the name disclosure. Now, let's go back to Justice C.J. Young real quick, because I'm talking about this name disclosure. So let's deal with C.J. Young real quick. Justice C.J. Young says, as we understand it, again, talking about the investigative stop, looking at when someone is detained, looking at the investigative sphere, because they're telling you, you got to have your papers. And the courts have already said they don't have the authority to say what's reliable and or credible. It's already constitutionally vague, unconstitutionally vague. But here's what Justice C.J. Young said real quick. As we understand it, the statute does not require a suspect to give the officer a driver's license or any other document, provided that the suspect either states his name, again, name disclosure. That's identification. Don't let them keep lying to you and try to make you feel you got to do something outside of that. When you provide a name disclosure, you all, you're now working within the realm of your Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure. And the other thing is you must announce that you're exercising your Fourth Amendment right. That's the whole point of exercise, right? Like most folks, we're not thinking, within that point, because you're like, oh, you took an oath to the Constitution and you're supposed to do this and you're supposed to do that. Yes, they are. But what are you supposed to do? You have to go beyond the point of, I know my right. There's a functionality that goes into the scope called exercise the right. There's a functionality with that. There's a responsibility, with that. And once you exercise the right, you then have to know how to protect yourself inside the right. Does that say someone will not violate the right? It doesn't say that. Thank you for sharing, the live. It doesn't say that someone will not violate the right, but it gives you an opportunity that if you have to take it before the court, you can use that violation to force them to change the manner and or way they operate. I showed you that within the Justice Department. The Justice Department said, if you want to stop what they're doing, you have to catch them in unconstitutional policing. Then they can be forced. See, they're telling us what to do or how to do it, but they can't make us do it. They've provided all of what we need to understand how to go at this thing. Is just that we don't have institutions that take the time to make sure our families understand these nuances. Everybody is just in fear. And they understand the advantage of the fear. But you all, it's now time for us to arm ourselves with education, right? Knowledge. Pick up the advocacy. In this day and time, it's about Fourth Amendment advocacy. This is what we need because our streets have been taken over. People are being snatched up. No one's protecting the people. And this is why I said, don't protest ICE anymore. Don't protest the feds anymore. Protest your governor. Protest your mayor. Protest your legislators and your representatives. Protest the sheriff. Protest the local police department because they failed you. All the years and all the time that you've served and you've done whatever you've done within your community or for your said state. And now that you are under attack, they offer you no assistance. This is unacceptable. You want to talk about accountability? Well, make them stand up against this state-sponsored violence. Make them stand up against this state-sponsored violence. And when I say state, I'm not talking about like Wyoming or Kentucky. I'm talking about state from the standpoint of a jurisdiction. See, the feds are a functioning jurisdiction. And they're dealing within state-sponsored violence against the people. And there's no political figure and or agency that have intervened to arrest it, to stop it. So the issue right now really isn't so much with the feds. The issue is, with your state authorities. The governor is the head. The mayor is the head. Even the sheriff functions as a head. You mean they're powerless? No, the people just need to demand what they demand. The people need to be in sync with respect to what they want. Don't be out there fighting, these agencies from that standpoint. Make your political figures, officials, make them do it. Turn your attention to their doorstep and make them go against this state-sponsored violence. Make them use their resources because the people don't have the resources. And the feds know this. The people are vulnerable, at risk, not knowledgeable. But you're preparing yourself to go out and vote again for this, thinking that's going to change it. Well, if I were you before I consider that, I'd make the ones that are in position and or place right now stand up against the state-sponsored violence. Make them come from behind the comforts of their office. Make them stand up, make them do something because they have a capacity and or a official duty, as well. We have to have a different way about going, at this, because in observation, we're not winning. We're not winning. Just protesting right now, it's in vain. More people, babies, we're getting gassed and, hit with these different chemicals and, getting hit in the face with, pepper spray. And come on, you all. This is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And we're just going to allow for the state officials to do nothing? No. I'm suggesting you don't protest against the ICE. Take your protest to your state authorities and your state officials and demand that they do something. Demand that they do something. You say the government is for the people? Well, this is a time for you to prove what you say. Otherwise, you're powerless. And right now, we're seeing how powerless the people truly are. So, versus floating in the middle, right? And them sitting up on the podium, saying, oh, this is that. No, make them do something. Make them intervene. The state has the resources to file lawsuits, more lawsuits, against the feds. The people don't. Which brings me to another valid point. There was a lawsuit centered around stopping them, from using certain tactics. And then the feds turn around and use an emergency ruling, to overturn that. Excuse me. And the court said that the case that the lower courts ruled on, they said it was too broad. It was too vague. And I understand what they did. And I'm just saying, if we're going to play the game, we need to understand how to play the game like they're playing the game. They went in and they looked at it and they said, oh, they're talking about, we're using the chemicals or we're doing this. And they say, oh, it's broad, it's vague. The reason being is because it was not appropriately associated with constitutional violations. It was centered around tactics. But if you tie those tactics to the fact that unconstitutional issues are taking place and you can prove and or show these things are taking place, and not because, it's happening, but because you hear people saying, I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure. You hear people saying, this is an investigative stop. My obligation is to disclose my name. You hear people saying, I'm going to exercise the Fifth Amendment. Now, you exercise the Fifth Amendment after you've done the name disclosure. Because the courts are saying in that scenario, in that situation, the officer's right, the officer's duty is to investigate. And if you're the suspect of the investigation, the law does not require you to do anything but disclose your name. Listen to what Justice C.J. Young said one more time. As we understand it, the statute does not require a suspect to give the officer a driver's license or any other document. Talking about your papers. All you're required to do is tell these people your name, and if they violate because they're going to do it anyway. But at least we're able to, amount or surmount these violations. So when you're now filing these court cases, you're able to have an adequate constitutional question. The constitutional question then shows how they've went beyond the scope of their duty, the law that they violated in that instance, the law that will be centered around how they conduct the investigative stop, and then looking at the fact that an individual exercised the right, because to exercise the right, it must be announced. Exercise. See, you got to do something. The first step is to announce it, to let it be known that this is what you're doing. After you do that, a name disclosure as identification, because they don't have the right to say what's credible, what's reliable. Then after that, the Fifth Amendment. Because the investigative spirit, let me read this to you. It has a non-threatening character in it. Let me give it to you. The non-threatening character. All right, let's hold on. Which one is it? All right, here it is. All right, so the non-threatening character, let me explain this one to you. The investigative stop, the investigative spear, the fact that the statute or the law only requires an individual to disclose his name. You're not obligated to provide any document. The courts say that's up to you to decide how you want to identify yourself, but They understand within law, a name disclosure is sufficient identification. I don't care what anybody else tell you. I'm talking about what's written. And the fact that they've placed us in fear, and then they make us trample our own right. You sitting up here saying you know you're right, and then you go outside the protection of your right to give them the ammunition they need to step all over your right. It don't make sense. And they're laughing at you because in one breath you're saying you know you're right, and then in the next breath you're assisting them to trample your right. So let's talk about this non-threatening character. And I want to show you how that has nothing to do with the demeanor of the officer, but the non-threatening character is centered around the type of stop, meaning the way they approach you. The investigative stop is a stop that has something called a non-threatening character in it. And that non-threatening character is centered around the fact that the officer is only asking you to disclose your name. That's the way it's written. Now, the other extra stuff that go along with it, the court said, we don't have nothing to do, with that. If you understand how to stand on your Fourth Amendment right to be protected, stand on that Fourth Amendment right. And then when the facts do come before us, we can then use those facts to then force them to change the policy or practice. That's where we've been lacking. We haven't used our wherewithal to trap them in a position and or play where on the record we have them, violating the right, and then a adequate constitutional question can be put in place to force them to change the policy or practice. Now, when I use this terminology, I'm then explaining what I read, on the Justice Department's on their website, right? Okay, so here, let's talk about this non-threatening character right here. In the course of explaining why investigative stops have not been subject to Miranda. So, looking at the point of when an officer comes up and he's saying you're being detained, why he doesn't have to read you your rights, okay? Because you're not under, full-blown, arrest. He's just there checking out something. He's just there investigating. He's within his right and or duty to investigate. So here, in the course of explaining, this is what the courts are talking about. In the course of explaining why investigative stops have not been subject to the Miranda, the court suggested reasons why investigative stops have a non-threatening character. Not the officer's demeanor, is talking about the stop itself. It has a non-threatening character, meaning it doesn't impinge upon your Fourth Amendment right because you're only being asked to say, my name is Tim Black, as a form of identification, a name disclosure. That's what makes it non-threatening. If the officer go beyond that, that's on him. You can't stop him from doing that. But this has helped me in a number of instances over 20 years, not needing, to go to court and, no tickets or anything of that nature have been sustained because understanding the non-threatening character of the stop and making them go beyond that, but then using the court to reprimand them for their lack of understanding. Right? It says reasons why investigative stops have a non-threatening character. Among them, the fact, you all. The suspect detained during the investigative stop is not obliged to respond to questions. So, this is what the courts are saying. The people just have to understand how to use it as strategy, how to stand on it in the course of exercising your Fourth Amendment right. If you know you're right, stand on your right. They're going to do what they're going to do. And they know the element of fear will make you trample your own right and then go and try to get remedy. It don't work. You can't get remedy when you do it to yourself, because that's the way the court's going to say it. We have to look at the facts that are before us. And when they look at the fact that you surrendered, they're like, we can't help you. Sorry. Sorry they intimidated you and they made you feel that way, but they can lie. It's not against the law for them to lie, for them to trick you, for them to play psychological games. They could do that. But if we understand the limit, I'm going to show you that. You should have already seen it. But I'll get to that too. It talks about the limit to what they can do, because they try to make you feel as if there is no limit. But I'm here, you all. I'm here. In 2015, I created the initiative centered around Fourth Amendment advocacy called Protection Against Search and Seizure. I want you to know this stuff. Our communities, our families, this is what we need to know, because the people need protection. And the protection is going to come in the way we understand the information to refuse the atrocities that are happening to us on the street. We need to be able to articulate what's happening to us on paper after the violation transpires. But you can't be a part of the violation and then expect to have some degree of remedy. And this is what I am witnessing when people are saying, I'm a citizen, I'm a citizen, I'm a citizen. Y'all, that don't mean nothing. That means nothing. How about I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure? Well, show me some ID. Well, my name is John Watson. And you're doing the name disclosure because the courts have said that's the safest way to go about it, to stay within the confine of the Fourth Amendment, to be protected. Then they told you the non-threatening character of the way that the officer is approaching you is centered around the fact that the name disclosure, and then you don't have to answer any questions after that, it protects you. But if you're not willing to stand on that, you don't have any protection. You're not able to get the benefit of the Fourth Amendment. That's just what it is. But you're in the heat of the moment, 9 times out of 10, most of you will be riddled with the fear, and you've been trained through a response that says, well, if I just do what they want, this will just go so much smoother, and then it'll be over with. And okay, well, you're participating in the point of allowing it to continue happening. Why? I'll tell you again. Because right here, the Justice Department said, if law enforcement engage in unconstitutional policing, it can be taken to court and forced to change its policies or practices. This is the Justice Department. They're explaining what has to happen. The issue is people aren't willing to stand on it, and they're taking the calculated risk that people are not willing to stand on it. Fear. They're using it to further their agenda. Well, it's time for us as people to stand together within the point of the information, supporting one another from the standpoint of doing what's right by exercising our right, knowing that we've done these things, and then in solidarity stand on the Fourth Amendment. In solidarity. It hadn't been done before, you all. While y'all out there protesting, your voice is mute because it's not centered around any principle and or any right. You all should be shouting Fourth Amendment, Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable search and seizure, the violation of your Fourth Amendment right now. Make these officials do their job and protect your right. And because you're not looking at it from the standpoint of your right, the civil right infraction, that's minuscule. If this is going to be something substantial, and if you're going to, or if this needs to go to the next level, it needs to be on the constitutional plane. It needs to be centered around Fourth Amendment advocacy, because that's what's getting hit right now. And people do not understand the dynamics of the Fourth Amendment. And don't wait for their experts or their professionals to explain these things to you. I don't know how long a number of you have been on this earth, but I know ain't none of them ever told you about no non-threatening character. I know ain't none of them told you about the statutory obligation being a mere name disclosure as identification. I know none of them have came and told and or explained to you in the course of asking for your papers that they don't have the right to ask, they don't have the right to say what's credible and or reliable, that it's already been noted as unconstitutionally vague. Now, people have to come together in the sense of their own unification to go against this on a broader scale. If you're in your little pocket and you're trying to deal with this, okay, you know, you do it for as long as you can, but we have to link up from one community to the next speaking the same thing, meaning Fourth Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fourth Amendment, name disclosure. Fifth Amendment, that question is, you know, incriminating because they can't compel you to answer questions once you identify yourself. And when you identify yourself with a name disclosure, they can't then turn around and tell you that's not sufficient identification because they don't have the right to say what's credible and or reliable. I'll give it to you again. Looking at credible, you know, or reliable. Colander versus Lawson, right? Supreme Court case regarding the requirement of credible or reliable identification. The ruling found the statute does not require people to provide credible or reliable identification. When asked by law enforcement, they say it's unconstitutionally vague. They'll threaten you and they'll say, nope, 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 you got to put something in my hand. But if you know your right and you stand on your right, you use the law to your advantage so that if you have to take it to court, according to what the Justice Department said, we can then force them to change the policy or practice. In the past, that's been our issue. We weren't using the tactic of unconstitutional policing to our advantage. We were focused on civil right infractions. And because we're focused on civil right infractions, it has no impact to change a policy or procedure. But if you listen to what the Justice Department said, they said if the agency is caught in unconstitutional policing, then and only then can it be forced. Do you all want to force them or do you want to keep begging and asking your lawmakers to do this and your lawmakers can't do nothing. If they could, they would have done it by now. But it's up to the people to create the scenario and or situation to where it's forced. And you have to look at what's written, provided that we're doing it in accordance to what's available to us. See, we're not trying to be above the law. We're not trying to beat the law, but we want to understand how to use the law to our benefit and or interest, because no one's really sharing with us what that looks like. How to be, active, how to use it, because right now we have to understand how to swing with that thing. We have to understand how to use it, right? Like as in defending ourselves. I love to say the Fourth Amendment is the best defense against their fast-moving offense, but you have to understand, the tenets centered around the investigative sphere. Let me take you to the investigative sphere right here. See, it says, coming out of Terry versus Ohio. And look, let me explain this, because folks love to talk about court cases and say, oh, well, they lost that court case. They lost that court case, and that court case was, lost. You all, when you're reading these cases, you should be looking for the precepts. You should be looking for the commands. And when you line those commands up, you can use those principles as a part of a strategy. I don't care who won the case, who lost the case, right? It's the point of what's in the case that you can pull out of the case to create a strategy for something you're trying to do. And in these cases, I've found things that help understand how to fortify the Fourth Amendment, because no one has explained to us, how do you get the guarantees? Check this out. You have guaranteed rights that you've never benefited from. Does that make sense? You have a guaranteed right that you've never received the benefit from. You cool with that? Is the guarantee just on paper? No. No one has taken the time to show you how to unlock it, that you can have the benefit. And they use fear to keep you away from the benefit. But the benefit is there. I'm just one man telling you, over 20 years, I've had the benefit. And I use that to create the Justice Initiative, Protection Against Search and Seizure, centered around making certain people understand Fourth Amendment advocacy, because now more than ever, the people need protection. This ain't no game. But here, it says, no judicial opinion can comprehend the protean variety, protean, Protean, meaning like quickly changing, because no one case, no one incident, let me say that, no one incident is ever the same. This is why we have to understand how these tenets work so we can be quick on our feet. It's like a boxer in the ring, being able to bob and weave. It's like, the football players on the field, each one understanding the design of the play to know, how they need to move a man, or what hole they need to go through, or what route they need to run. And it's unfortunate we haven't been given this skill set. So it's time for us to back up and come to understand, to have this skill set, because that's what's going to salvage the dignity of our communities. That's what's going to keep us safe as people, because right now the officials can't do it, because furthermore, the people aren't doing it. But in the void or in the vacuum of that, take your attention off of the feds and turn your attention, to your state officials, the governor, who's the head of the state, like the president, the mayor, who's the head of the city, like the president, the sheriff, right? The most, profound law enforcement, entity in the county. And then you have the locals, police department. Make these people work for you. Make these people defend you against the state-sponsored violence. State-sponsored violence meaning the feds having a jurisdiction that's considered a state. A jurisdiction on paper is considered a state. A state is a jurisdiction. A jurisdiction, is a state. But here, it says, no judicial opinion can comprehend the protein variety of the street encounter. And we can only judge the facts of the case before us. And this is what I'm telling you. Because people are not standing on the principle of the Fourth Amendment. They're letting it fall, in between the cracks. The courts can't rule. Not in the favor of the people. They say we can only judge the facts before us. And if it's a fact that you didn't exercise your Fourth Amendment right, then you can't get the benefit from it. If it's a fact that you didn't understand the statutory obligation to merely provide a name disclosure and then use the Fifth Amendment that you can't be compelled to answer any other questions, they can't rule and say that the people did something unconstitutional. Yeah, it looks like that and we understand that, but the fact is you didn't exercise your right. You didn't stand your ground. You let fear overtake you and then you sided with the officer to continue trampling your right. And now you want to try and turn that at the last minute? It doesn't work like that. The courts are telling you we can only judge the facts of the case before us. Nothing we say is to be taken as indicating approval of law enforcement conduct outside the legitimate investigative sphere. Legitimate meaning is proper, appropriate, or just meaning they've already determined how the legitimate sphere should function. They don't approve of them functioning outside the legitimate investigative sphere. The issue is most of you didn't even know that was a thing. So once we understand the underwriting to this legitimate investigative sphere and how that props up what it means to be detained, the investigative stop, then we can use that education and that understanding to force them to change their policies, their practices. It's the only thing at this point that can be done because they are not going to stop. They're not going to stop until the right judgment come down. And because these judgments that have been going in have been more based off of the emotion, they're shooting, they're hitting us with, pepper spray and chemicals, they'll come in and turn that over because they're not able to associate the constitutional violation to it. There's not an adequate constitutional question associated with it showing how, they're going beyond the statute and how they've gone beyond the scope of, an individual's right or it's unconstitutional. Being able to put those two things together. I shouldn't have to explain these things, These attorneys that are filing these cases, they should know this stuff to make it airtight. But in some cases, to keep it going, they allow people to do things based on the emotion just to make you feel as if something's being done. It's like a symbolic victory. And they in it to get money too. So we got to wise up. and come to understand what they need to be doing in the manner and the way it need to be done. Otherwise, you don't know what they're doing. Wouldn't it be nice to have an attorney that you can sit down and talk to and say, hey, these are the things that are going on, and based on, the investigative sphere, they went beyond the statutory obligation as I gave them, the name disclosure, and they tried to compel me to do X, Y, Z. I used the Fifth Amendment to protect myself against, any other questions, and, they were functioning off of, this statute, or this code, and they went beyond the duty of the non-threatening character. And then to create a sound constitutional question off of that, and to position your case centered around a unconstitutional issue, that's different. Most of these cases, when you're talking about the pepper spray and all, is centered around civil rights violations. It'll never work. It never has worked. Furthermore, your Justice Department, they gave you the key. They told you what to do. Catch them in an unconstitutional act. Then you can force them to change the policy. How many more times I got to say it? We're not helpless. We're not powerless. We're just not organized. And they want to keep us running around, out here under these vain protests. I wouldn't want, to stop anyone from doing what they're doing, but wasting your energy should be asserted. It should be tactical. Understanding the environment that you're dealing with. The environment that you're dealing with, you all, is centered around the legitimate investigative sphere. That's the field. If it was the basketball court, that would be the court. Football, that would be the field. Ping pong, that would be the table. It's the investigative sphere. Now we need to know how to navigate in the investigative sphere so that we can win at the game. We can be the ones seen with the best of skills. Can't be out there just, all haphazard moving around. Oh, they've had us like that, discombobulated for too long. And unless we're willing to incorporate this understanding as a part of our organizations and our groups, all of that with the Panther Party on the corners with, their weapons, that's not going to work. They hope you do something silly from that standpoint. Give them a reason to drop fire from the sky. They've done it before. 1985 move. Pennsylvania took out the whole block. You all think, because you can stand on the corner with your little arm, that you're doing something. Stop playing. We need to get smart and realize the pen is still mightier than the sword. We just don't understand how to articulate our ideas just yet. So we've always allowed for our emotions to get the best of us. We're ready to swing. And some folks are trying to convince you that that's the best option. Like, the feds are, up in the city. Let's just go at them. No. Beat them on paper. Take them to the investigative sphere. Challenge them based on the actual rules. That's not happening. Oh, y'all want to say we ain't got time. Ain't nobody got time for that. And that's why what's happening is happening. You're satisfied with being complacent. We're in a time of emergency right now. We need this understanding in order to take it into the courts. Without this information, the courts say we can only judge the facts of the case before us. What will be the facts of the case before them if we're not dealing with it centered around the investigative sphere? What would be the facts of the case, you all? It's going to be something outside of that, and this is why we're not winning. The key is understanding the playing field. That's how we gain the advantage. Having networks that go across state lines and regions and, making it national, that we're able to communicate on this level. We're able to convey information, to this degree and of this standard, making sure people understand across the board what needs to be done. Can't remove the fear. I know that's a part of it. But people need to understand from one door to the next, exercise your Fourth Amendment right. How you exercise your Fourth Amendment right. What the investigative sphere is. How you maintain the integrity of the investigative stop, that you don't violate your Fourth Amendment right. So that you can have something that will go before the courts and they can judge the fact that this is a constitutional issue. Our attention needs to divert specifically to the facts of Constitution or unconstitutional behavior, not civil right infractions. Drop any and all discussion centered around civil right infractions. It don't work. The civil right infractions are what have over the years allowed them to continue doing what they do, and that we're still begging for policy changes and things, and they keep saying, oh, these things take time. But we just read where the Justice Department said if you want to force them to do it, then catch them in an unconstitutional act. That's what you got to do. See, but the attorneys get money off of the civil right infractions. That's where they get the $1 million. And, they're, once the incident is fresh, right? You go to them and you pay the money and all this other stuff. And they're like, yeah. And riling you up and, that's wrong. But it's a civil right infraction. If you do get a case to where you get some money, then you disappear. Look at all of the incidents that have transpired and all of the money that have been paid out. Before, they were all up in the front, in the media, and they were talking. When they got that check, they disappeared. Shut their mouth. These are, the trappings of the civil right infraction, which allowed them to continue doing what they do. And these attorneys keep getting these checks. But if we're going to win, we have to make certain that the attorneys understand we're not settling for civil right infractions. We're going after this from the standpoint of the constitutional issue or unconstitutional issue. Now, what remedy or what strategy do we have to put in place in order to deal with it from that standpoint? The communities need to be looking at strategies centered around constitutional protection, making law enforcement, the feds, overstep the bound. So when this information go before the courts, as they say right here, we can only judge the facts of the case before us. Nothing we say today is to be taken as indicating approval of law enforcement conduct outside the legitimate investigative sphere. So that's where the attention needs to be focused, centered around that understanding. Okay. What else? Now, I think, let me give you this one. Let me give you this one. Because we're talking about Fourth Amendment advocacy. And I'm telling you right now, more than ever, our people need protection. More than ever, what we should be learning is Fourth Amendment advocacy. Everybody in America, from one jurisdiction, from one state to the next state, we need to be standing on the Fourth Amendment. It's unprecedented. It's a novel approach. But you need to tell your neighbor, say, neighbor, stand on the Fourth Amendment. And when we look at the point of what it means to exercise our right, on all these videos and everything that's being pushed around on the internet, we need to start hearing people shout it out. I'm exercising my right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure. And then, if you're being detained, you must understand what your next move is. If you are being detained, your next move is then to identify yourself. You now have to decide how you're going to do that. But the court said the least you have to do is disclose your name, and that's acceptable identification. Once you do that, you have to then know they're going to continue to harass and interrogate you out in the field. They're going to do it. It's called an in-field interrogation. You now have to understand how the Fifth Amendment comes into play, because you now can't be compelled. You ain't got to argue and go back and forth. Just come to understand. When they say, well, were you this? Say, exercise my Fifth Amendment right. That question is, incriminating. That question is incriminating. That question is incriminating. That question is incriminating. That question is incriminating. Because they are there to do an investigation. It's not your job to assist them with the investigation. Your only obligation was to identify yourself, and you should have done that based on what the court say by name disclosure. That's the obligation. There's no paper, as they're saying. Do you have your papers? What papers? The courts have already said they don't have the authority to say what's reliable and or credible. Y'all running around scratching your head. Like, what papers do I need? Should I have my passport or my license? What? My birth certificate? My Social Security. It's like, psychologically, it's insane. And you've fallen into it because you don't know. You don't know the investigative sphere. You don't know how to exercise your Fourth Amendment right. At this point, you're being played as a credulous individual. But you can do something about that. Arm yourself with right knowledge. Arm yourself now with Fourth Amendment advocacy. I'm here. It's what I do. It's what I've been doing. Before 2015. But I created the initiative in 2015 called Protection Against Search and Seizure. In 2015, I did that, understanding this day, this time was coming. And now, more than ever, the people need protection. Let me read this one for you. Our first task, this is coming out of Terry versus Ohio. This is what the courts are saying. Don't listen to me. In fact, nothing I am saying is based on like my opinion or my emotion. I'm dealing with substantive law. I'm dealing with evidence-based academic research. That's what the initiative is centered around. As I'm helping and educating, individuals to understand these dynamics, it's research, court cases. As they've said, If you want to deal with law enforcement, it must be centered around the Constitution and court cases, which deal with the everyday practices of law enforcement. Did you hear what I said? Let me read that before I get into the Fourth Amendment. I want to read that, give you the understanding of what the rule, what the rules are, right? Here. All right. So law enforcement must be conducted in accordance with the parameters set by the U.S. Constitution. Once again, this coming out of the Justice Department, right? Accordance with the parameters set by the U.S. Constitution. In this instance, we will be talking about the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, things like that, right? It says, and the state constitutions, which still have Fourth and Fifth Amendments in there. It says it must, not should, maybe, possibly. It must be guided by the many court decisions. This is why you keep hearing me talk about Justice C.J. Young said this, Turd versus Ohio, Hybel versus Nevada, whatever case I'm looking at, because if we want to understand how to be successful, we have to look at the principles within these cases to then use them as a part of our strategy. It's the only way you're going to have a good defense is looking at what they've said we should use in order to win. They've spelled it all out. The issue is you haven't read it. The issue is your experts and professionals haven't pointed it out or taken the time to explain it to you because they're too busy. Nobody really cares, about the people until, some liquid, is flowing out of their head or, coming from, some part, of their body. And then they want to come and act like they care for you because they can benefit. Money. Ching, ching. Money. Money. Don't allow yourself to be that individual. I know we got a lot going on, right? Let me finish reading this. It says, it must be guided by the many court decisions that have defined. The court decisions have defined in greater detail what the text of the Constitution means. So we're talking about the Fourth Amendment. How do we use it to protect ourselves against the investigative stop? So the court decisions have defined in greater detail, right, what the text of the Constitution mean in the terms, here it is, of the everyday practices of law enforcement. How much more solid do you need it to be? They're giving us the understanding. The issue is your experts and professionals ain't never point that out to you. They're not interested in showing you what the limitation to law enforcement is. Within the legitimate investigative sphere, there's a strict limitation. But if they show you that, that means you hold the power and they're in a position of being, with less power, and they don't want that. But the law is meant to be used to assist us as the people. The Hybel case says we should exercise our rights against the government. I'm not being radical. I'm just explaining what the justice or justices have explained we need to do. They can't do it for us. They've spelled it out. They've done what they're going to do. They've laid it out throughout the court cases. Now, we have to come like, the jigsaw puzzle and start putting these things together to where we can use them as a part of our strategy. But you're waiting. You're waiting for those experts and those professionals to come. They're not coming. They've been gone. Only because I sit with the people do I realize If I don't get this information out to the people, I'm just as vulnerable. I spent the 30 years studying, researching, and putting this thing together so that I could empower other people. I benefit from it over the 20 years, but one man benefiting is nothing. I need 100,000 people to benefit. Then we have a voice. Fourth Amendment advocacy. It's real. But what the courts say, we have to look at in greater detail the text of what the Constitution means in the terms of the everyday practices of law enforcement. The everyday practices, the practice, okay? That practice is when they approach you on the street and they say, let me see some ID. So the courts within that practice, according to the investigative sphere, have already decided in that scenario, all a person has to do is state their name and its adequate identification. Now, a tactic of the law enforcement would be, nah, give me an ID. And they'll keep harassing you. But you need to understand what the courts have decided based on the everyday practices. And we have to know how to use these tenets or these principles within these cases to our benefit. Otherwise, the courts have nothing to stand on as a fact to protect the people. Now I'm going to go back to what I wanted to read about the Fourth Amendment. And then I'm going to find that one part where it talks about, these investigative stops are limited. And you need to know what those limits are so that you can hold them to the confine of the limit. Basically, stay on the outside of the limit. Make them cross the limit, then it's unconstitutional. But if you go in the limit, that's on you. We just have to understand the difference. No different than on the football field or basketball court. If you step on the line, you're out of bounds. As long as you stay inside the line, you can run your play. Investigative stops have limits. It's best for us to stay or know how to stay outside of the limit. Keep them in the limit, everybody's safe. If you go in the limit, you're going to get hurt. If they step outside of the limit, then you can use that against them. Here, from Terry versus Ohio, it says, our first task is to establish at what point in this encounter. See? It's always about the encounter. And the courts are looking for information to help them understand at what point during the encounter, right? To establish at what point in this encounter the Fourth Amendment becomes relevant. The courts are basically making the statement that they're trying to gauge the point. When does the Fourth Amendment become relevant? But guess what? Nobody's exercising their Fourth Amendment rights. So does it become relevant? Because they've said we can only judge based on the facts that are before us. And if it's a fact that you didn't exercise it, how do you expect to benefit from it? If it's a fact that you went beyond your obligation to just disclose your name and you started doing all these other things, then my friend, you're violating your own right. You don't understand how to exercise your right. But you'll boast, I know my rights. I know my rights. I got a right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure. Well, exercise it then and stand on it. But fear is the problem. right? Okay. Now, the other thing too about the investigative sphere, when you're being detained, there's a certain amount of time centered around the investigation. And I've explained this, before. There's a time, right? If they go beyond that time, it becomes unreasonable. And I've asked many officers, what is that time? Most of them, they don't know. I mean, hell, they don't have to know because the people don't know. Okay. And I've heard them say ridiculous answers. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I can hold you as long as I want. Okay. But when it comes to your Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure, their time limit is 2 hours. Okay, you can find that, or I found it, within Delaware state law. That 2 hours, right? I know that's a long time, right? But that's what they've been given to conduct their investigation. And it's not your job, my job, or anyone's job to help them with their investigation. We need to understand the limits within the investigative sphere to protect ourselves from the investigation. And that's name disclosure. And then you can't be compelled to answer questions. Protect your right. All right. All right. So let's see. Okay. So here's one, but I'm going to find, this is not the one I was looking for, but I'm going to give you this one. So the court said, we therefore reject the notion that the Fourth Amendment does not come into play at all as a limitation upon police conduct. If the officer stops short of something called a technical arrest or a full-blown search. So that's what I was trying to get to, the point of the technical arrest. Now, I did explain what the time limit is, right? In most cases, though, they don't hold, people for, the 2 hours. But it's just for you to understand and or know that if ever you find yourself in that environment, you're just looking at the clock. And as long as you maintain your position centered around exercising your Fourth Amendment right, then you're good, based on the principle that if you have to put facts before the court, they can have the facts that you stood on the principle of exercising your right. And you made them go outside the scope of the investigative sphere, right? So the technical arrest, what it says is when you're detained, it cannot resemble a traditional arrest. So we have to understand these things. If it's not a custodial stop, where the officer has come up with the judicial warrant with your name and everything on it, they know who you are. If it's not that type of stop, then if you're just being detained, it cannot resemble a traditional arrest. Well, what does a traditional arrest look like, you say? If you're being detained and they put locks on your wrists, that resembles a traditional arrest. It's already been decided, but most people don't understand that dynamic to even point it out within a constitutional question to show a violation against the legitimate investigative sphere. We always like to talk about what they did, but it's good for us to invert that and talk about what they didn't do. They didn't honor the investigative sphere, the non-threatening character, and they made the detainment look like a traditional arrest. They didn't honor the investigative sphere. Okay. So it can't look like a traditional arrest. Let me find the one where it says it must be limited. All right. Did that one already. Oh, I'm going to get to the limitation. You heard me say exercise your right against the government. Well, I want to read it to you. So they say we do not read these statements as controlling. So I have to point out, what statements are they talking about? They're talking about the non-threatening character centered around the investigative stop or the statutes, right? You have these statutes for the investigative stop that allow the officer to investigate, that allow the officer to ask questions. He can ask you all the questions he wants. Can he? Sure. He can ask and say whatever he wants. You need to understand your position and what you're obligated, to deal with. So they say, we do not read the statements as controlling. What they're saying is the statutes don't require an individual to do anything but provide a name disclosure as identification, which they say at that point that's not a violation, to the Fourth Amendment. Once the officer positions he's officially doing an investigation. Once the officer is expressed, you are beyond, that reasonable or shadow of a doubt, you are being detained. Once that is solidified, then your only obligation at that point is to identify yourself through name disclosure. They say that's not controlling because you're not being compelled to provide this document or that document. You're not required to do anything else. So it's not controlling. Beyond what you think or how they make you feel out there through fear. They're saying, remember, we just read the requirement. This is looking at the court cases to understand the everyday practices. So we have to know what's being, written in these cases to see the limitation to the investigative sphere. So their investigations are not controlling because they're not asking you to do anything but at most disclose a name. Then after that, you can go into questions being incriminating because they then can't compel you to provide answers. And you shouldn't help them with their investigation. They say the passages recognize that the Fourth Amendment does not impose obligation on the citizen, but instead provide rights against the government. This is where we all need to be. Knowing what it means to exercise our right against the government. Y'all, they're telling you what to do. What more do you want them to do? You want them to come and do it for you? That's insane. It's not their fault that you're afraid. Oh, they might do this. Oh, they might do that. You got to put your big girl pants on, your big boy pants on, you all. They don't give a damn about you. They're going to do what they're going to do anyway. At least we can position ourselves to have a stance lawfully. As long as you keep laying down and you're not exercising your right against the government, you don't have a lawful stance. The civil rights infractions are not going to help you. Look, I'm showing you what's written from the Justice Department to the court cases to, the Constitution. It's like these are the things that must be done in order to have adequate remedy. We do not have adequate remedy because we're not using these things across the playing field. We're just not doing it. We're expecting it to be understood. That's our problem. That's our fault. And they're not coming in, with the reinforcement to make sure you're educated, to know how to appropriately deal with this as adults. And we just witnessed a woman get clapped in the face. Highly unusual, you all. That sends a message. For as much as I've seen and been through, I'm like, that spoke volumes. So we have to step our game up. Because they're looking for a reason now. And if you let your emotions get into it because you don't understand how to deal intelligently with them, then you might be next. And I say to folks, like, I've been using this information for over 30 years. I've been using it for 20 years successfully. And when I say successfully, I mean immunity. Letters from the solicitor saying no accusation, will be filed. Because of how I handle the information. Don't have to go to court. I set traps for the officers because I understand the spear. And if you understood it, you could function, the same way. It's like how Saquon Barkley runs that ball. It's because, he has a certain skill set. But my point is, in all the years of me functioning with this information, I ain't never been beat. I ain't never been tased. I ain't never been clapped at. But I have been victorious, and I'm not bragging. I ain't boasting. I'm just pointing out the fact that the information, the knowledge, the education, this intellect is key. Because we're dealing with law enforcement agencies from the Fed side to the state side. And we have to understand how to deal with them within the ramification of the law. Not trying to be above the law, but just trying to understand how it works. And if the courts are telling us to know what it means to use the right against the government, why you hesitant? We're being encouraged by courts to do this. It's the other resources and propaganda that make you feel like, oh, you're being radical, if you do that. You shouldn't do that. And that's because they make money off of us. So they feed us misinformation to keep us vulnerable. If you're an adult, you need to grow up. If you're an adult, you need to stand on principle and stop being afraid because they're doing what they do. And all I'm telling you is, in using this information and not your emotions, you can come out on top. I'm no one special, but as an example, I've been doing this for over 20 years and being successful. And like I said, haven't been beaten, haven't been tased, haven't been clapped at, but I haven't been convicted either. And most recently, in 2022, I was accosted and given 5 different charges. 2 of them, I was told, are very serious charges, including obstruction. I didn't see the inside of a court. I have the letter from the solicitor stating no accusation is going to be filed. They don't have evidence. And I want more people to understand how to get those letters. This ain't no trick. This is just understanding knowledge, understanding the information, realizing the rules. Not our emotions, because we think our emotions will give us gain. The louder we get, that's going to give us some victory. It do not work like that, you all. I'm telling you. We have to have a sound strategy centered around functionality based on what we're dealing with. And if we're talking about law enforcement, fed or state, there's something called the investigative sphere. It's like a football field. It's like a card table if you're playing Uno. There's certain rules that go with it. There's certain things that you have to do. You can't make it up. And you need more than one piece. Let me find that other one I told you that was centered around the limitations, right? Let's see, where is it? Here it is. So it says, here's one. It says, the principle of an investigative stop permit a state to require a suspect to disclose his name in the course of an investigative stop. So again, that's not the one I was looking for. I'm gonna get it. But here it's telling you during the investigative stop, all you're required to do is disclose your name. If you're being detained, all you're required to do is disclose your name. If they are trying to tell you that that's not reliable, that that's not credible, it ain't your fault that the states have the courts. It's not your fault that the courts have already decided your only obligation is to state your name, because they'll say something to you like they said to me once I gave them the name disclosure. Man, I can't, what am I supposed? I'm like, that ain't my fault. I've satisfied my obligation. And they continue. They'll try, and make you move outside the scope, of your protection by making you do what they want. Because if you fold, then again, the courts are saying we have to deal with this based on, what's in front of us. Right? I'm still trying to find the one that I was looking for where it talks about the limitation. I guess I'll have to find that on another time, because you all's time is valuable, and I appreciate it. Thank you all, for coming, into, the room. I can tell based on the analytics, about 700 people, a little bit more came through, today. But we're talking about Fourth Amendment advocacy. We're talking about standing on the Fourth Amendment right now, across the board, nationally, right? Locally, regionally, nationally. More people need to start making videos and promote protection against search and seizure, right? That's the justice initiative that we're looking to explain this information. And I'd love to have you all, on the Discord or, on within another room to where we can spend time specifically getting into the evidence-based academic research, talking about different scenarios, because there are even things that we have to consider if we do, have to be in a courtroom if you don't have an attorney. There are simple things that can be done that are no different than what we're reading right here, that folks just have to understand what's available to them. That's all. We're just in a bad situation to where the experts and professionals haven't clearly explained what's available to us. They have kept us handicapped, and or in a positional situation to where we have to rely on them, and then without them, we're vulnerable. Right? But those things, must change. Those things have to change. I apologize, you all. I have not been looking, into the comments if you all have been, asking questions. But I tell you this, the floor is open. If anybody want to come up, I would be more than happy to entertain, questions or, show you guys some other things. But to talk about the investigative sphere, to talk about the limits centered around what they can or what they can't do, I mean, looking at, again, what's solid for us to do. Now, again, does that say that they will not violate your right? No, it does not. Because they're out here, on 10. They are. But at least we can position ourselves to exercise our right against the government so that if it goes into the court, they won't say it's broad, it's vague. They'll be dealing with, or they'll be face front and centered with a constitutional issue or a unconstitutional issue centered around someone expressing exercising their Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizure. And for us to now rally around the Fourth Amendment. And I'm telling individuals to turn your attention, leave ICE alone. They're going to do what they do. Turn your attention to your state officials, the governor, the mayor, the sheriff, the police department, the legislators, the representatives. Turn your frustration to them. Make them come out of the comfort of their office and protect you. Make them stand up for you. They have the resources. See, the feds understand the individual people don't have the resources. It's 100 times more difficult for the young man that they snatched up off the street and took him, miles away and then dropped him off battered and bruised. And he has no idea who snatched him up that he can even file a complaint. Y'all. Come on now. Make the governor responsible. Make the mayor responsible. Make the police responsible. A man was just kidnapped. He don't know who did it. There's no law supporting that. Not substantive. There's nothing in court cases that speak to law enforcement being able to just grab somebody and go. That's not a part of the investigative sphere. But nobody's talking about the investigative sphere. They got your attention focused on other things like, saying, hey, you need to get your papers. And they say, oh, that's just not so us. When they should be saying that's unconstitutional because the courts have already said you can't call credible and or reliable identification to say papers. What papers? What are you talking about? It has been explained through the everyday practices of law enforcement that the most adequate thing to do is give a name disclosure. The law is requesting a name disclosure. That's identification. The statutory obligation doesn't go beyond a name disclosure. Facts. Written. Substantive law. You can follow it. You can track it. You can read it. So before I go, I'll say it again. Then I'm out of here. Oh, okay. So before I go, thanks for the gifts and everything. You all appreciate it. So before I go, I'll say it again. Start telling your family, start telling your friends. It's time to stand on the Fourth Amendment. Most folks don't know how to use the Fourth Amendment. If you don't know how to use it, come talk to me. We'll talk about how to use it. We'll look at the research and the things that I've done over the years that has been successful for me. I deal with thought theory application result, you all. What that means is from that thought, and I'm looking at that theory, when I go into application, if it doesn't provide the result, that means you got to go back and check the theory. Because one thing about a principle, when you go into application, it's always going to give you the same result. And thankfully, for over 20 years, it has provided, the same result. Thought theory, application result. So I would love to share, with the families and with the friends, because these are perilous times that we're living in right now. And the people need protection. So get on your social media accounts and, talk about protection against search and seizure. Hashtag protection against search and seizure. That will help, to promote the initiative, right? Hashtag protection against search and seizure and, mention, at the cause 2K. So that way we can explain this to more families. So that way we can create unified strategies from one state to the next state. So we'll have, we'll have a fighting chance. We'll have support, communities. We'll be able to talk about, these things in solidarity across the board, but based on the Fourth Amendment. I hope y'all can understand what I'm saying. Based on the Fourth Amendment. Looking at how we use the Fourth Amendment to defeat the corruption. Looking at how we make the other officials support the fact of the Fourth Amendment. Looking at where the courts have said we need to use these rights against the government. The feds are the government. What right should we use against the government at this time? The Fourth Amendment. We need to understand how to exercise it. We need to understand how the Fourth Amendment is associated with the investigative sphere. create our strategies, when encountered by law enforcement, run our plays, give them an opportunity to step across the line, so then we can take it to the courts and force them to change policies and practices, not ask, what can we do? Because when you go asking, they say these things take time, and that time never comes. But according to the Justice Department, if we catch them, within unconstitutional policing, then we can force them. So that should be the aim and or the goal, from one city to the next city, from one region to nationally, is looking at what does it mean to catch them in unconstitutional policing, and positioning ourselves, if ever we're dealing with them, understanding how to adequately, properly exercise our Fourth Amendment right, and make this a time that we stand on the Fourth Amendment, we talk about the Fourth Amendment, we make it be known that we have a guaranteed premise within the Fourth Amendment to be protected. We just have to unlock it. They've made it very clear to us it's not their job to show us how to unlock it. So we have to come to ourselves within our own rooms and understandings to then look at the information to see what has worked, who has been doing it successfully. So I'll stop there, and appreciate you all. By the grace of the Creator, I'll be back, next Thursday if I don't pop up, some other time and, give some more information. But I can't say it enough. I can't say it enough. I can't say it enough. It's time for Fourth Amendment advocacy. In 2015, I created the initiative, Protection Against Search and Seizure. Now I need you to have it. I need you to understand the everyday practices of policing. I need you to understand the investigative sphere. I need you to understand what your statutory obligation is. I need you to understand how to exercise your rights. I need you to understand, that we need to deal with them in the courts centered around constitutional violations. That's it. Anything else is not going to be effective. So if your mind is not on how to make them create a constitutional violation, and not just sitting up there shouting, you violate my rights, you violate my rights, I'm a citizen, I'm a citizen. No. It has to be practical. It has to be surgical. It has to be strategical. It has to be based on what the Justice Department has said, in the manner that we should look at the everyday practices of law enforcement. Using these court cases, using the Constitution, in this instance, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. There are others depending on what your instinct may be, but off the jump, we're talking about the Fourth Amendment, tying that to the investigative sphere, looking at what the limits to the investigative sphere, what they are. Let them violate that within an unconstitutional manner, not a civil rights infraction. Use that as leverage to then force them to change the policy, as the Justice Department have told us. If you want the policy changed, this is how you force us to change it. Bring something unconstitutional before the courts. They're not going to bring an unconstitutional act against themselves. It's up to the people to introduce these violations. It can't happen if you're in fear. And being in fear is not going to help you, because they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. All right. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for reposting. Thank you for coming in. And yeah, Y'all hang in there, man. Y'all follow me. And for real, I hope to have more of you in the back room where we can share these things in our communities. Everybody have rights, you all. Everybody have rights. Unalienable rights, you all. The states can't give them, can't take them. And that's why the courts have said we need to use our rights against the government. Not the privileges, not civil rights. A civil right is a privilege. It don't work for us. Rights against the government. Unalienable rights. We have to understand the power in these rights. We have to use them to defeat the infringement upon our rights within these communities. That's the main resource that we have, but because it has went over a number of our heads, we're missing it, thinking we can shout at law enforcement and we can talk slick to them. And yeah, buddy, you better go and get your lunch, big boy, because, man, forget all that. That's not going to help us. We got to be tactical. We have to understand how to navigate the pen to articulate our thoughts. Right? This is an administrative state. This is an administrative government. They're hitting us with a chain of words. So we have to understand how to use our own chain of words, centered around constitutional principles, period. Anything else is not going to work. The court said rights against the government, not civil rights. Okay? Not anything else, the rights. So we need to start analyzing what are these rights that we can effectively use them, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop until the court forced them to stop. And the only way they can be forced to stop is the unconstitutional violation. So say the Justice Department. What more do you want? Now we just need to build to get that result, because they've already said what needs to be done. They're not going to stop coming until this one thing is done. And they've laid it out. So it's now the responsibility of the people. So we have to become more organized. As I said, we're not powerless. We're just not organized. And you have those that are organizing around vain principles. They're not organizing around the Fourth Amendment, because folks haven't understood how to use the Fourth Amendment. So I'm just positioning myself as an individual that is being available to share, that knowledge and that understanding, because people are hurting, people are being injured, and we don't have anybody in our communities that's adequately doing it. Furthermore, I'm only as strong as the next individual, within the next, city, state, region, nationally. If one of us, are vulnerable, really, all of us can be vulnerable. And I know you've heard that type of saying before, right? Yeah. So we just need to make it to where more people understand. And more people are able to stand up for others, that, like, if we're organized around the Fourth Amendment, and members within, our understanding, or, members associated with us around the Fourth Amendment, should something happen and we know they know the principles, then we'd have, the war chest to then use funds to appropriately deal with these things in the court, because they've already expressed they're taking the calculated risk because they know people don't have the resources to take them to court. So we also have to amass resource to take these things to court centered around the way we need it done. Being specific, being intentional, aimed at shutting it down, realizing the right is the key to shutting it down. How do we strategize it? How do we get it on paper to show they're at fault? How do we take the Justice Department at its word that we got to deal with them with an unconstitutional act and then force them to change the policy? On that note, I appreciate you all. And until the next time, y'all be safe. Y'all make sure, you follow me. And, let's get into the other, meeting rooms, and let's start sending this information to our family and loved ones in other cities, other states. And let's create a great network against the atrocities and/or the violation, of our rights. Protection against search and seizure, you all.